fight and to lead others in battle against Israel's enemies.
His physical strength found rival only in his moral weakness.
Samson has one other vice, and that is Samson loves Philistine women. And this was a no-no in ancient Israel, but he loves them. And the one woman that he really loves is Delilah.
Philistine lords realize how devoted Samson is to Delilah. They use her as a kind of spy to find out the secret of his great power.
Delilah was pressured into action.
On several occasions, Delilah presses Samson to tell her why he's so strong.
Samson thirsted for Delilah.
And at first he lies. He does not reveal the truth about his Nazirite vows. And in the end, he doesn't even quite come clean. But he tells her that the secret of his power is in his hair. And if his hair is all shaved off, then he will become as weak as any man. She passes this information on to the leaders of the Philistines. They sneak up on him while he is asleep at her house.
Samson loses his supernatural strength, his God-given strength, and they were able to bind him, and they gouge out his eyes.
Samson gets his power back really by praying for it, by showing devotion to God, by asking God. God restores his strength. Samson topples the temple, and as the story says, he kills more Philistines in his death than he did previously in the rest of his life.
Samson's pursuit of pleasure cost him his freedom, but the Philistines' ropes could not stifle his determination. Today, the world looks for leaders who combine the courage and strength of a person like Samson and with the wisdom and judgment of a sage. All of those qualities can be found in our last hero, David.
God sends Samuel to Bethlehem, to the family of Jesse, to anoint David to be the next king.
God's choice of David was unique because in the ancient Near East, and also with the first choice of the king, what were people looking for? They were looking for the biggest, strongest individual.
David would soon be given the opportunity to prove himself fit as a leader.
And of course, this is the famous David and Goliath story. David, again, is back with the sheep while his brothers are in the army fighting the Philistines. But the Philistines are technologically superior to Israel.
The Philistines employed iron weapons, thereby putting Israel at a tactical disadvantage. The only strategic leverage for the Jews was control of high ground, making Philistine attack difficult.
The Philistines have recourse to an ancient custom, which is a battle of champions. So they put their champion Goliath out to challenge a champion from Israel.
King Saul made a declaration to his soldiers. The man who kills the giant will receive riches, his daughter as a wife, and will live tax-free. Still, the soldiers were afraid.
So no one wants to fight him. But David comes to deliver lunch to his brothers on the battlefield, and he hears that this is going on, and he's personally offended that no one is willing to fight Goliath. Not because he thinks he can defeat him on his own strength, but he knows the power of his God. And so David takes the challenge and does what no one else is willing to do, and that is face Goliath.
David threw himself at the feet of divine fate.
Now, David used a slingshot, and we kind of think of kids using slingshots, but these are serious weapons. Armies use them. As a matter of fact, within the army of Israel, the Benjaminites were particularly adept at the sling.
The sling held stones the size of baseballs. The gifted musician called upon God to empower him. Skeptics long argued that David was a legend contrived by a band of inconsequential nomads. Until 1993, when archaeologists digging at Tel Dan in northern Israel discovered a stone slab on which David's name is inscribed, thereby becoming the first archaeological reference to David outside the Old Testament. David became the most celebrated king in Israel's history, as his lineage carries the blood of earthly royalty.
Coming up, what did scientists dig up in the 1960s that proves the Bible's accuracy?
Over 400 years passed between the last book of the Old Testament, Malachi, and the arrival of a religious teacher whose birth, life, and miracles would soon serve to shape the course of human history. Was this teacher, Jesus of Nazareth, simply a good man, or was he sent directly from the right hand of God? Let us take a look at the life of Jesus as recorded in the New Testament Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Our question for the experts is, are these Gospel accounts reliable?
The reliability of the Bible has been repeatedly proven and demonstrated. Many people try to find contradictions in the Bible, but there really are none.
I've yet to encounter any historical evidence that is contrary to what's found in Scripture, what's found in the Bible. To me, the Bible really is impressive in terms of its historical accuracy.
As archaeology continues to uncover new evidence and as more manuscripts are discovered, the whole trajectory is that the biblical authors were very reliable in how they presented the history.
The usual rule is the farther removed you are from events of the first century, the hazier it ought to become. Because of archaeology and because of 2,000 years of excellent biblical scholarship, the opposite is taking place. We're getting a clearer and sharper image of what's happening.
There is no historical evidence that disproves the Bible.
In setting out to examine the reliability of the Bible, what kind of proof will we require?
Very often when we talk about proof, people are thinking in terms of a mathematical proof. They want it as solid as 2 + 2 = 4.
But historical evidence doesn't add up the same way a math problem might. Evidence in history often relies on the quality of the testimony. So the question must be asked, how did we get these stories about Jesus? Where did they come from?
Everyone agrees there was a period of orality when the gospel stories were passed down orally from community to community, mouth to mouth, if you will, as opposed to being written down, and that process took a few decades. But it was in a Jewish context in which they were used to reciting prayers that they had memorized.
If this story about Jesus and his teachings had not been important, they would have been lost a long time ago. So they passed on these traditions.
People heard Jesus tell a story. They saw Jesus work a miracle. They remembered, they shared, they turned that story over in their minds.
The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the 1960s provided scholars an opportunity to measure copying accuracy. The scrolls, believed to be from the 1st century AD, contained an excerpt of the Old Testament book Isaiah. Scholars compared the Isaiah fragment with next available copy from the 9th century. The results are startling.
99.9% same text in both. So this idea that the copyists have, totally changed scriptures just does not work. And it really is a pretty worthless argument.
There are non-biblical accounts of Jesus, and these are very important. In fact, some scholars have actually demonstrated that you can get the basic story about Jesus by not even looking at the New Testament.
To the surprise of some, Jesus is also mentioned in other religious texts.
When we look at the broader field of religion, and we consider writings from the Muslim world, the Quran, or from the larger Jewish world, the Midrash, Talmud, that we discover that Jesus is also featured in those writings as well.
Coming up, what proof is there that Jesus actually lived? And is